You're welcome back and you're watching Good Morning Nigeria. And to begin our conversation today, let's bring up this report by Timothy Yusuf.
The 16 days of activism against sexual and gender-based violence, also known as the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women, is observed annually from November 25 through December 10 across the world. Back home here in Nigeria, it serves as a critical platform for raising awareness and advocating for the rights of survivors of sexual and gender-based violence in the face of prevailing challenges and implementation gaps by government and other critical stakeholders. Already, it's been 25 years of marking the 16 days of activism against sexual and gender-based violence. Many believe that the campaign has catalyzed significant progress in various areas. Appraising of the journey so far by gender experts revealed that there has been the strengthening of legal frameworks to combat sexual and gender-based violence. They include Domestic Violence Act of 2015 and the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act of 2015, marking significant milestone in providing victims with legal protection and avenues for justice, even as the states have also adopted their own prohibition acts or laws to align with federal regulations, contributing to a more concrete effort against sexual and gender-based violence. Another success story, according to experts, include collaborative efforts among stakeholders and disability-inclusive approaches to strengthen access to justice and survival support. However, some drawbacks have also been highlighted. There are challenges like low prosecution rates, cultural stigma, and prevalence of funding gaps. As the 16 days of activism against sexual and gender-based violence ends tomorrow, stakeholders are of the view that eliminating sexual and gender-based violence requires sustained action and systemic change across all sectors. This is in the face of United Nations report that every 10 minutes a woman is killed, making violence against women and girls one of the most prevalent and pervasive human rights violations in the world. Therefore, the urgent need for collective action to clamp down on the menace of sexual and gender-based violence, described as an epidemic that knows no border, shattering families and devastating communities. Good Morning Nigeria today will x-ray the campaign and advocacy done so far in the last 2 weeks of the 16 days of activism against sexual and gender-based violence, lessons learned over the years and strategies to be adopted towards nipping the menace in the bud going forward.
Thank you very much, Timothy Yusuf, for that background report. And joining us in the studio to discuss the gender-based violence, we have I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Mufuliat Fijabi. She's the Executive Director, Sustainable Gender Action Initiative. Dr. Fijabi, you're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nigerians.
Okay. Good morning, you're welcome. And we also have in the studio one of our regular, Asmao Benzis Leo, Gender Specialist, Executive Director, Center for Non-Violence and Gender Advocacy in Nigeria, Sengen. Good to see you again.
And good morning, Nigeria. It's always a pleasure being here.
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure to have you as well. Now, let's begin our conversation. We know that gender-based violence is becoming rampant these days, and it's really a worry to the government and the people, and that is why the 16-day activism, is well organized against this. Before we look at the successes and the role that the agency is playing, let's look at the root causes of gender-based violence and how it can be addressed. Dr. Fijabi.
Okay, thank you for having me. When you talk about gender-based violence and the root causes, there's no way we discuss it without touching on our cultural practices. The way we approach our cultural practices at times, especially from a negative perspective, not holding on to the dignity of the human person, contributes to the extent of violence that persons suffered. And in terms of religion as well, you have negative religious interpretations that impart on the treatment of women differently from men. This also contributes to the extent to which persons suffer gender-based discrimination. If you look deeper, the prevalence of male child preference is also a problem, because most times people believe that the girl child will soon get married, will soon leave the father's house to go into another family. So they don't pay so much attention to the kind of opportunities, the kind of education, the kind of empowerment that the girl child gets compared to that of the boy child. So most times, we also contribute to it in how we bring up the children, making girls feel like they are not very important or feel like they are second-class citizens. And girls grow up to become women who in the end, if they are not educated, become disempowered and, continue to occupy the second-class citizen position in the country. So there are quite a number of factors that one can attribute as some of the root causes of gender-based violence. Gender-based violence could also result, from the kind of laws practiced in communities and in countries across the world. And that's why it's also a good thing that there is an awareness, there is effort, there are legal frameworks to address some of these root causes of gender-based violence. But most importantly, when we need to look back at our culture and promote the good ones, and and then talk about those ones that are very, very patriarchal in nature, that continues to reduce the space of the womanhood, continues to reduce the space of the girl child, and prefers the male child. It's not that the male child is not important, but where you give opportunities to the boys more than the girls, thinking that the girls are subhuman, then it becomes a problem. And that also impacts on the kind of interpersonal relationship that you have, when the girls go into marriage, when the boys, also grow up to become men and the girls become women and they are married. We're talking about domestic violence today, not necessarily because of the new relationship that may have been started, but because of the predisposition, to the fact that maybe girls have little contribution to make to any society. And this is not true. We've seen the kind of achievement that girls have achieved over the years. So digging deeper into the root causes of gender-based violence is one way that would also help us to address those gaps that is limiting the efforts of girls, the efforts of women across the globe. And we must be realistic. If we do not remove those root causes, then we will continue to dance around, the same factors all the time. If we remove it by being committed, implementing the existing legal framework, and also understanding that whether someone is male or female, they are human beings, they have life within them, and they have that dignity of the human person that is a fundamental human right that must be respected from time to time.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
You have a backup? Okay.
Go ahead.
You've outlined some issues here, but most of the time when we discuss gender-based violence, across board with people, with friends, the issues about addressing it, people, most experts say requires a multifaceted approach, including when we talk about patriarchy, we also look at the fact that as mothers, as women, we are also enablers, are we not? The boy becomes a king and the girl does all the work in the house. You teach the boy that the girl is there to serve you. The girl is there to do everything for you. And when these boys become men, they look at the woman as a servant, not as a wife. As women too are also enablers, because are we supporting patriarchy here? Because when we talk, they say you're a feminist, but we are not.
Thank you very much. I'm laughing because I'm a woman.
Yes.
And I'm also conscious of the fact that women are enablers and also they are the custodian of patriarchy. Yeah. Women give birth to men, women give birth to boys. So the society itself is being controlled by matriarchy in this essence. Yeah. And whatever we see today is the product of homes and families, upbringing. Boys always have these privileges, especially in Africa, because of male preference. Most families feel if you don't give birth to a boy, you have not started giving birth. And so consciously boys grow up to men knowing that they take or they occupy a very important place in the society, and therefore they can do whatever they want to do. When you talk of other forms of violence besides domestic violence, you know, when we talk of toxic masculinity, when you are young, when we play, I used to remember when we were playing with boys, immediately you fight and a girl beats you and you cry, you dare not enter the house because your mother will send you out and tell you, why in this world will you allow a woman beat you and you will cry and come back home? You are a useless boy. Go back and beat the hell out of her.
Yes.
And so
because she's a girl.
Yeah, because she's a girl.
And
so
she's considered weak.
Exactly. That's what the notion that women are weaker sex. So with that kind of mindset, the boy grows up and he feels when he marries, the woman does not have any right to challenge him.
That's why we have that mindset is changing now.
It's changing, but just at the level of, let me say, awareness within the urban areas. When you go to the rural areas where there is less education, where there is less literacy level, you discover that this thing is still endemic. There's nothing you can do about it, but because you know that culture is our way of life. She talked about the issue of our cultural beliefs, social norms. These are part of the negative social norms that makes boys grow with toxic masculinity and they feel they will have their way. Another aspect is also the enforcement of such laws. Nigeria has fantastic laws. The Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act is there, you know, preventing all forms of violence against all forms of people, not just women or girls. But you look at it, and then even the domestication of such laws within the state, they have watered it down. The content, the original provision in the act is not what has been translated at the local level or at the sub-regional level. And you see that reflecting in even our justice system, because the laws are flawed and they are weak. So it does not, you know, provide for enforcement. And when you see that even in the aspect of rape cases, you will see a perpetrator, violence against women. We heard of the, you know, the death, how somebody killed. This is a daily occurrence in our communities, daily occurrence. And you will see that the perpetrators going free within the community. They've not been arrested. They've not been, you know.
Just like what happened in Maiduguri recently.
Exactly.
The man is walking freely after killing the girl.
So what do you think will be there's no deterrence? And so every young man in the community that has that kind of tendency will also go out and do the same, because if it's, oh, if Mr. A does this and he's walking free, I can equally do it and nothing will happen to me, unless there is political will to begin to enforce such. And that is why even our justice system, the security sector, will have to take the issues of violence against women and girls seriously, because women and girls are becoming endangered species. Women can no longer feel free within, both in domestic and public spaces. So are our girls. In schools, they are not free. At home, they are not free. In the offices, right now, sexual and gender-based violence within the public sector is huge. And nobody, because of the compliance to the public service rule, some women cannot come out and say, my boss has harassed me. Some of us have been in the public sector and we can tell you authoritatively that this thing occurs there, but you dare not talk about it. So there has to be a collective will for people, individuals, institutions, government to come together and say enough is enough, and there's no excuse whatsoever for violence against women.
Thank you very much, Asmau, for that. Your introduction there, which is quite interesting. I mean, you've highlighted a lot of issues there, especially concerning the policies and, you know, laws, which you said they are not as, you know, they need to be strengthened. Anyway, we'll come back to that. But I think our guest in Kaduna studio is ready, and that is Professor Awao Evelyn Yusuf. She's the special advisor to Vice Chancellor Kaduna State University, KASU, on research, culture, and executive director and chief executive officer, Center for Study and Resolution of Domestic Violence, and former director, Center for Gender Studies. Professor Evelyn Yusuf, you're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
Talking about gender violence right now, and I'm sure you must have listened to the comments of the two guests in our studio. Let's have your view, your own view on the, What is gender violence and how can it be addressed? Okay, I'm asking for your perspective on gender-based violence in Nigeria. Your perspective on gender-based violence in Nigeria and how it can be addressed. Having some issues there. Okay, let's come back to Dr. Fijabi. Dr. Fijabi, earlier on you talked about the cultural and the social norms, that contribute to the perpetuation of gender-based violence in Nigeria. Before we look at the policies and the laws, let's consider what are the physical, emotional, and psychological effects, of these gender-based violence on the victims. Well, let's look at the psychological, physical, and emotional effects on victims.
Okay, so when we talk about the effects of gender-based violence, it's multiple. One of it is that it reduces the self-esteem in those victims. They feel like the world doesn't like them, something is wrong, they cannot fit well into the society, and it requires a whole lot of support for them to be able to get out of the traumatization that they've gone through. And at other spaces, some of them end up with physical scares for life. They've been injured. We've seen instances where a spouse stabbed the left eye of the other spouse, in a domestic violence case. What happens to the eye that is already gone? The effects are multiple. And for some women, it's been economic denial. They can no longer fend for themselves. Some of their properties have been seized. Some of them no longer have access to the resources that they should ordinarily have access to. Some women have actually run away from their homes because of violence. So all of this make life difficult. And we talk about women and girls, because they've gone through a lot, in the upbringing. At times, some of them go through pains that they don't get to talk about until they become matured and are old enough to say it. But why should this continue? When you also talk about the effects of gender-based violence, you're looking at restriction. The person is no longer the normal self, is afraid, that maybe something bad would happen again, doesn't want to go through it. And the most painful out of it all is the fact that there's at times no justice, because the law at times requires certain level of evidence. In the cases of sexual and gender-based violence, for example, it requires some level of evidence before actual prosecution. And you at times find that those perpetrators that evidence have not been established against still go around free. And some of them still taunt the victims to say, what has happened? Nothing. So we're looking at a situation that, if you begin to talk about the effects of gender-based violence, it's not just on the individuals that have suffered it, because you also talk about gender inequality. It also affects the country. Because our level of growth never be the same, like when men and women contribute and their contributions are recognized meaningfully. When it's not recognized, there are prices paid for gender equality that a lot of UN agencies, UNDP, for example, in their Human Development Report, have spoken about from time to time. And it also creates a situation of fear, in parents, also in families, families that have, for example, been affected by one form of violence, gender-based violence or the other. They have sad stories to tell. And if you're looking at violence and you really want to measure the impact very well, you can begin to think about those places where this violence takes place. Is it school-related violence you want to talk about and the effect? It is multiple. Is it in conflict situation? Unfortunately, we have quite a number of IDP camps in Nigeria because of some of the challenges we have.
Yeah.
You know what's going on there.
Yes.
The effect is multiple. So it's not something that one person should have the commitment to continue to work. It's what requires the effort of everyone. There shouldn't be any excuse for any act of violence on anyone, whether gender-based or otherwise. We should all have our hands, our efforts, out there pursuing the fact that we should live in a world free of violence. We should live in a world that respects the dignity of the human person. If I see you as a human being, I shouldn't be hurting you or slapping you. I should have respect for the life in you. If we go around without mentality, of saying that, oh, this person is human, let me treat that person like a human being, not somebody I can just, perpetrate violence on, make life miserable for that person, then it's going to go a long way to help us. So we cannot actually exhaust. Some women, you talk about traumatization, psychological imbalance. We've attended to a number of cases of gender-based violence before, and it's painful to see how the women operate afterwards, because they are no longer themselves. Yes. I've had to attend to a woman before who was going through domestic violence case, and by the time she left my table where I was attending to her, she left without her shoes. And she went downstairs. It was after walking her out, and I came back, and I saw that her shoes were beside my table.
She had forgotten.
She had forgotten her shoes.
The psychological
so
trauma.
I had to run after her to talk to her more, refer her to more counselors to speak to her. So we cannot exhaust it. We just need to be more strategic in how we deal with it.
Yes, because year in, year out, we sit down here and we talk about gender-based violence. And I was having a conversation with a friend when I got the topic, and I said, we're discussing gender-based violence. I said, we talk about it, Jume, every year in, year, but what have we seen? What is happening? Now let's bring in...
We have to keep talking about it.
Yeah, we have to keep talking. Yes.
Stop.
So let's bring in
our
professor.
The more you talk about it, the better it becomes.
Yes. Let's bring in Professor Hawa Evelyn Yusuf. She's a special advisor to Vice Chancellor Kaduna State University into the conversation. I hope you can hear me now. So you've been listening to what the guests in the studio have been talking, and we've already laid the basis for this conversation. Now, let's bring you in. You've heard about the stigmatization. Let's talk about support now. When we talk about, enough support for people of gender-based violence across the country, especially women. We are not saying that there are no men, being, abused. There's some percentage, I think, but most of the time it is women.
Thank you for talking for us.
Yes, it's women and girls. So let's have your perspective on this gender-based violence and the support system that is there.
Good morning again. When you talk about support system, it is near zero. Why? Because the quantum of GBV that occurs within the Nigerian society is such that there is the need to expand support. There is little or no support for the survivors. I don't like calling them victims. I call them survivors. And the fact that they need succor needs to be brought to bear. There is need to have more shelters where people who have been traumatized can be taken to for the purpose of rehabilitation. You see, a lot of these things happen, but if you go to our states, you find out that there are no shelters to take these people to. Because the first thing you want to do to somebody who has been traumatized is to take that person away from that environment, for that person to find a safe space. I call it a safe space, where the person can hear out what he has gone through, where the person can have people talk to them. Because like Dr. Mufli had said, there's a lot of a psychological effect that goes beyond our cognizance. The fact that some women lose it. Some survivors lose it. They don't even remember where they are or who they are. It leads to a lot of low self-esteem when a woman is continually battered, whether physically or verbally or psychologically. when a human being, let's not just say women, because we are talking about gender-based violence, men and women suffer this, even though we have more female victims than we have of the male victims. It is important for us to know that these persons need people who will understand them and who will be willing to talk them out of the stigma. You know, we make them feel demeaned. We make them feel unwanted with the way we treat them. When somebody continues to beat up a human being on a daily basis, or when you continue to verbally assault a human being, you tell somebody that that person is not worth anything. You hear somebody tell you that, who do you think you are? Without me, you are nothing. And again, it brings me to the issue of economic violence. You deprive a woman or anybody at all from empowering themselves, from doing whatever will bring economic satisfaction to that person. And then when you get the opportunity, you tell the person that the person cannot survive without you. You tell the person that the person is useless. These are some of the verbal violences that take place. And then again, psychologically, that person becomes completely derailed. He does not understand. You can imagine somebody going somewhere wearing his own shoe and then leaves that place without the shoe and not even knowing that she has left that particular place without her shoe. And this person is not insane, but that person is traumatized. So there's a need for our intervention to become more victim centered. We need to begin to think of what to do. Like with my experience in centers for domestic violence in the United States, I came back with this notion that there's the need for a shelter. And that's why I built my shelter in Kaduna, where we give succor to survivors of GBV. And what we try to do is to try to talk them, give them psychosocial therapies, try to talk them out of that corner where they have found themselves, and try to make them feel human again. This is something that is very important. Kaduna State also has shelter where they can keep survivors and try to walk them out of that quagmire where they have found themselves. So I will say that we need to become survivor-centered. But the most important thing is for us to prevent these occurrences to the barest minimum. It is not just about them not getting justice, because our justice system is not doing us well when it comes to cases like this. However, we should be thinking of how to prevent, and that's why we insist on advocacy into communities. What we see mostly on TV or on radio are the ones that happen in the cities. You need to go to our rural communities and see the quantum of GBV that occurs in that space. It will be good if those of us who talk about this thing year in, year out, like Jummai said, we begin to go into the hinterland, we begin to go into the rural communities and begin to enlighten our people of these basic things that are GBV related. Perhaps we will begin to change the narratives so that it's not an everyday affair that we just come to the television and come and talk about it. Meanwhile, we do nothing after the 16 days of activism. And so what? What do we do after the 16 days of activism? Some of us live and die fighting GBV. But a lot of us, majority of us, just do this for the show, especially in the 16 days of activism. So I like to call on people like me who talk about these things to begin to think of what we can do on a daily basis to eradicate this quantum of GBV that occurs. It is very important that we begin to think, okay, if even we get justice, what happens to the survivors? What is justice for us? Is it getting the perpetrator punished, or is it rehabilitating and resuscitating the survivor? So there's a need for us to begin to look at our approach to GBV from a different perspective. Yes, justice. We want justice. We want perpetrators to be dealt with. But what happens to the victim? Perhaps because I'm a criminologist, I am looking at the victimology aspect of this GBV. There's the need to concentrate on the survivors. There's the need to give them the light to live again. There's the need for us to make them know that whatever has happened to them has happened, but they must move on. What we should do is, apart from the psychosocial support we give, we should begin to look of how to empower them, because the majority of these things occurred with poverty. That is not to say that enlightened women, big women, are not being traumatized. Thank you.
Professor, thank you so much, Professor, for your opening remarks there. You've spoken a lot about the issues there. You talked about lack of support, adequate support system, and the need for more intervention, and in particular, prevention, which you said is very important. Now, let's come back to the studio. Asmao, earlier on, just like the professor said, and doctor, you talked about the inadequacies of the policies and the laws, to actually tackle, to address these challenges. But, from what, has been said today, let's look at the roles that institutions like school, healthcare centers, providers, law enforcement agencies, traditional rulers, what roles, do you think they need to play for us to be able to address this issue?
Thank you very much. Before I answer that question, I also want to respond to some of the issues she raised.
Okay.
The issue of inadequacy of service providers. To be fair to the government has put in place mechanisms for responding to GBV. We have 36 states in Nigeria, including the FCT, and I think there is just 2 states that do not have the sexual assault referral centers. And in these sexual assault referral centers, it's a one-stop shop that has all the component. The medical component is there, which is the health component, the justice system component, the psychosocial support component, including the security intervention component. There is another component even added, rehabilitation and this livelihood support for survivors and their families. So when sometimes we begin to say that it's inadequate, we should look at the existing framework and structures. What we need to be talking about is how to strengthen them. You understand?
Yeah.
Strengthening them and strengthening the capacity of both the personnel and also the equipment that
Are
they
the
need
people
to
aware of these, centers? That is just
people
and functionality of the
the
centers
victims.
survivors and their families I cannot say that they are fully aware, but it is an advocacy, enlightenment issue that is already ongoing.
Okay.
My organization, for instance, have done GBV assessment for service providers and the development of referral pathways in the entire northern Nigeria. And what we found out within that space is that it's not the issue of the absence of those centers. Besides the sexual assault referral centers, we have what we call service providers. And these service providers are multifaceted. One, we have those from the health sector. The primary health care centers in the villages sometimes serve as what? Service providers, especially first responders to sexual and gender-based violence. We equally have the courts, whereby you go for access to justice. They also are service providers within the legal and justice system. The security agencies are there to also, even though sometimes victims and their families also suffer from the hands of the security sector, especially the Nigerian police. And equally, we also have some non-state actors, especially NGOs, community-based organizations, health, faith-based organizations that offer both psychosocial support to the victims, rehabilitation to the victims, and equally the entire livelihood support framework for the victims and their families. We equally have a lot of actors playing out within this space. And I can tell you that there are organizations within the localities, especially community-based, that are not funded by anybody. They render pro bono services to these victims and their family, and they offer also enlightenment on the dangers, like what we're talking about of GBV. They also informed, especially they work with the sexual assault referral centers that we call SAT, to also enlighten the community of the essence and the location of this. So the referral pathway, what it does is that in each of the states that we work, we developed for, in fact, there are more than 1,000 service providers just within the north. And their capacity might not be so huge for them to render such services. But there are also some indices that will make them to know that, okay, for this particular service provider, they have what we call, they are highly recommended, because the facilities, coming to your questions, are they adequately equipped? Yes. The SAC centers, I can say to an extent, 60-70% of the equipment are there. Okay. The personnel are a bit, you understand, they have the basic requirement. Because even within the provision for assessment, there's what we call those, what we call indicators that has to put those organizations under scrutiny. We have developed a kind of questionnaire online based on the responses from these service providers. We're able to trace them or put them or track them into highly recommended service providers, and those that make referral. For those in the community, because they do not have the capacity to respond to GBV issues, they are serving as what? Referral organization. When cases in the community, because some of them are the only organizations you have in the community. So even though they don't have the capacity to respond, they can have the capacity to refer. So they serve as referral organizations. So basically, they also offer, in whether directly or indirectly, we have them on ground to offer such services. Then coming to my question, the aspect of the role of community members, community leaders, is very important, because
schools, healthcare centers, and all that.
Starting with the community leaders, most of these GBV issues within the community is being reported to the community leaders. But what we see in this process is that they use the ADR method, which we call the alternative dispute resolution mechanism. They don't like going to the formal security sector or to security agencies like the Nigerian police for such cases. They just bring the family of the girl, the family of the boy, settle it out of any court or whatever they call it, and at the end of the day, they may be required for compensation. At the long run, there is no justice, because the victim has not been adequately compensated. The survivor has not even had any closure as far as that case is concerned. Coming to the aspect of our religious leaders, we know how it is in Nigeria. Whenever there are cases like this, similar to that of the traditional rulers, they always say, okay, no, for the issue of family dignity and the honor of the family, it is better the boy and the girl settle it. If possible, they should just go and marry each other. Does that really cover the case? Does that bring closure to the survivor? No. This is what we call secondary trauma. You are further traumatizing the survivor, because you are pushing the survivor into the hand of the perpetrator. And at the end of the day, that child or that woman or that girl will live the rest of her life in misery. Schools are not really, because they have not been trained to look at our school curriculum. Is there anything like sex education? There's none. Is there anything like even kind of maybe our civic education? But it doesn't really go down in training our young ones to respect, like you said, the dignity of the human person. Basics of human rights. Do they even understand what human right is? Do they understand what violence in itself is? Something that is when you hit a girl or you hit a boy, that is violence. Sometimes verbal abuse. Most of the times we see how bullying occurs in our school. What are those anti-bullying strategies or action plans that we have within the schools? The teachers themselves are mostly perpetrators of this violence. You discover that young people have been raped or molested in school by the people that were actually supposed to be taking care of them. What of the principal? You understand? Let's leave the school in itself and then come back to the general community. How do we view violence against women? Violence against women is being seen as normal, because women's right is not protected. So if you commit any act of violence against a girl or a woman, it is just one of those things. it doesn't really make them feel, oh, this is an offense or a violation or infringement on the right of
She's a woman,
another individual. A woman is seen basically in Africa as just a product or just like any other item in your house. So unless we begin to put more preference, or not preference, but giving women their rightful place in the society, gender equality should become the order of the day. When we say equality, permit me to say that we don't mean that women, men should be the same. Equality in terms of opportunities, equality in terms of rights, equality in terms of privileges. When these are given to women, we are not asking for too much. This is basically what we are talking about. When conversation has to do with us, nothing for us is without us.
Do you think women are actually playing the role they're supposed to play?
They are. I can tell you they are.
Okay.
A lot of women, they are playing. But you know what? It's the recognition of the role that is lacking.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's bring in Dr. Mufiat
Dr.
into the conversation. That what she has said brings us to the issue of conspiracy of silence. We've seen a situation where a girl is married and then she's abused emotionally, physically, and all that. And when she comes home, she runs back home. The mother will tell her, that was how we were patient enough to stay in the house for you to grow up. But now we see a generational change of young girls who say they would not tolerate gender-based violence. And we see a high rate of divorce happening across the country with younger people. Married 6 months, it's over. What is happening? What is happening here?
Okay, so I think what is happening is more about having enablers of gender-based violence in our community, in the kind of families we all come from, in the kinds of community leaders, in the kind of country we live in. Enablers in the sense that when they see an act of violence, they tend to be quiet about it and silent instead of addressing it head-on. If it is addressed head-on, then there will be peace. There will be some kind of trust, and you won't have young people going into marriages that will break up in 6 months or in 5 months. Okay, in a situation whereby a mother is telling the daughter that that's how we experienced it, she's condoning violence. Yes. Or even if it's the father, why is she not digging deeper into the root causes? You know, just as we try to identify at the beginning of this program, to see what's making life difficult for that child, for that daughter in that relationship. And then it's addressed. And you find in communities, you know, just like Asma mentioned, a lot of the times when you find cases of defilement, you find cases of rape, that you see it's rape and defilement, you have community leaders intervening to say that the alternative dispute resolution should be applied. Why should that be? It shouldn't be. You know, they shouldn't be enablers in any way, in any form. It should be dealt with, because this same person will still go to another person to do the same thing. And the person becomes a perpetrator throughout that particular community. And why are they resolving cases of sexual and gender-based violence when the law of the Federal Republic of Nigeria says it is criminal? At what point did they become law enforcement agencies to be applying ADR? In Lagos State, they have laws in place for traditional rulers, for religious leaders who decide to be dispute resolvers in the community for cases that law enforcement agents should be dealing with. They also get their own penalties, punishment for enabling the process. So in this instance, to encourage young people to remain in their relationship, we should deal with those causes of what is sending them out. Those acts of violence that traumatizes them, that makes them to feel like, oh, if I cannot live peacefully with you, I'd rather stay alone. Okay, so we should not encourage marriages breaking up. We should not encourage families also enabling those causes of marriages breaking up.
Okay, I want to ask, because of our time, the role of activism now in preventing this gender-based violence. I mean, this 16 days activism against gender violence, how successful has it been?
The 16 days of activism, you know, it's another opportunity every year to raise awareness, you know, to shed more light on what's happening in terms of progress that has been made in dealing with those issues of gender-based violence, and also in raising awareness on the need to prevent gender-based violence. Because if you prevent, you don't need to deal with all of these crises. And in dealing with situations of gender-based violence, I must say and emphasize that the government has a critical role to play. And by the government adopting the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act in 2015, it means the government also recognizes that there is a danger and it needs to be addressed. That VAP Act is applicable in the Federal Capital Territory, and the various states in Nigeria have also adopted it, in their own different format as violence against persons law in their state. So they need to be more active by enabling those laws, especially in the states. There should be structure, there should be resources, budget lines should be created to support dealing with gender-based violence. And that's one of the essence of these 16 days of activism. Few weeks ago, there was the, as part of 16 days as well, the 10th network meeting of the Sexual Assault and Referral Centers took place here in Abuja. And we had quite a number of personnel of those SAC centers in attendance. They shared their experiences. They spoke about the need for more support. In Nigeria today, we only, according to ROLAC, the international idea, we only have 47 SAC centers in Nigeria. The only one functional in Abuja is in Buhari. Buhari is far from the city. Even if it serves the people there, it doesn't serve the rest of the remaining 5 area councils in Abuja. The same thing applies to state. We should not fold our arms as state, because the states are also responsible to the citizen. There should be that deliberate effort. There should be budgets to fight gender-based violence. It's true that we talk about it every year, but it's not where we started from, because there is progress. 16 days of activism started more than 2 decades ago. Yes. There was no Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, but today we have it. We have quite a number of states that have adopted that, and they are making effort to make sure that they protect their citizens, but it's not enough. The magnitude of response is not matching the magnitude of the cases of gender-based violence recorded. So we need to take action. We need to understand that 16 days of activism will end tomorrow, but the efforts to address those causes must continue. We also go to the grass. Like recently, we were in Gwagwalada. I have to say this. A lot is happening in the grassroots. We were in Gwagwalada last week, Thursday, to deal with the communities. And it was very pathetic to find that amongst the over 100 women we spoke to, sensitized, some of them spoke publicly about their experiences of gender-based violence. This shouldn't be happening. There is need to prevent, and there's also need to respond to protect those that are already affected.
Yes, indeed, you're right. It's good that the voice is coming out now. Usually before, nobody says anything, they just keep quiet, they're afraid. Yes. But now they're coming out to voice out, what is happening to them, and, seeking solutions to the problems we have. Let's bring in Professor Hawa into this conversation as our time. We're rounding up this conversation. What do you think, what do you suggest, going forward, should government do, to ensure that women and girls and any other person that is abused is protected? Do we need stronger laws?
I'd like to say that it's not about stronger laws, it's about implementation of existing laws. Let us even see these laws work. Let's begin to see people being convicted for perpetrating gender-based violence. And I'd like to take on Asma once again. When she said there are SAC centers, I'm happy Dr. Mufliat has cleared it. 46 SAC centers all over the Federation. How does that help me in my community? Kaduna State is proudly owner of 4 SAC centers. But what is the budget line? What is the budget line for these SAC centers? We need to call on the government and the people to begin to put right emphasis to those. The Center for Study and Resolution of Domestic Violence go into communities, and I want to clear this, nobody is funding that center, but we go into the communities to make sure that we talk to people and we try to give services, immediate services to persons. We work with the SAC centers like none other. It is very important that we know that these laws are there, but there is a huge conspiracy of silence. I keep saying this year in, year out. Let us not color the situation. We have moved, like Dr. Mufli had said, yes, we are beginning to achieve it. People are beginning to speak about it. So, but what happens to me when I have come out to say I have been violated? When I have come out to say that I am being battered on a regular basis? What is the service for me that betters my life after being traumatized? This is the angle from which I want us to look at it. And let us put in our strength. That's why our slogan is that we should unite against GBV. Let us bring our powers, our resources together. Let's bring our voices together. The major perpetrators or enhancers of GBV are we women ourselves, in the way we train our children, in the way we bring up our children to believe that the woman is a second fiddle. That is why I say we need to understand that there's a need for gender equity. Give to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God. If I merit a position, give it to me because I merit it and not because I am a woman. And at the same time, don't deprive me of what I merit just because I am a woman. These are the talks we need to begin to take to the grassroots. Our fathers should also understand that there is no difference between the girl child and the boy child, because girl children have succeeded in some climes and they can be very valuable to our society. So these are the things, the narratives we need to begin to change. And then please let law enforcement agencies stop treating gender-based violence as trivial issues. We need to move away from that. Nigeria and indeed the world need to understand that rights are rights, whether you are a man or a woman, and that it is very important to begin to build the confidence of those who have suffered, who have been traumatized. If you have a SAC center that is a one-stop shop, then where do I go to after receiving your services? I go back to that same environment where I have been traumatized. And then the trauma continues in the form of stigma. So,
Professor, thank you very much, Professor Awa. Because of time, we just have to cut you short. Apologies for that. Thank you for your recommendations. Let's just have a smile, your parting shot now. How do we sustain this present advocacy in just 1 minute?
It's something that we need to intensify on a daily basis. Advocacy for our organization, that is what we stand for. Center for Nonviolence and Gender Advocacy. So advocacy is something that you just don't do it one-off and then you relax. And I also want to say that, Nigeria, we've gone far. Before now, we never had anything like SAC Center. It's a move that we are making, the government is making, other actors are making. So we need to also, complement what they are doing and also be able to say, okay, they have done well. We are not where we used to be, even though we are not where we want to be. But Nigeria has made huge progress. 44 SAC center is not a joke. But what we should demand from also the government side is the ability to also replicate such centers, even within the local communities. And our organization has successfully done that and submitted the report, because it is inadequate, but still is a step in the right direction, even as we move further. Thank you.
Indeed, it's a step in the right direction. We hope by the time we come back here next year to talk about this thing, we have good news, we have progress happening. Asma Benzis Leo, Gender Specialist, Executive Director, Center for Nonviolence and Gender Advocacy in Nigeria. Saying again, thank you so much for coming, as usual.
It's my pleasure.
And Dr. Mufilat Fejabi, Executive Director, Sustainable Gender Action Initiative. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. And Professor Hawa
Evelyn
Yusuf, Special Advisor to Vice Chancellor, Kaduna State University, KASU, on Research Culture, and Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer, Center for Study and Resolution of Domestic Violence, and former Director, Center for Gender Studies, KASU. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, we'll take a break now. The program continues. Stay with us.